It is Friday, September the 29th, the last weekend, the last 2 days of September, as October is right around the corner. We have a ton of college football, pro football to talk about here on Friday's edition of Wager Talk Today. I am Steve Merrill, filling in for the Prez. He'll be back on Monday. Co-host Teddy Covers joining me as always. And we've got Ralph Michaels at the top, Carmine Bianco, and also Arthur DiCesare from the Westgate Superbook in Las Vegas. And let's get right to it. Let's start off with the chart master himself, Stat Daddy, father of Jeff, so many nicknames at WagerTalk.com. It's Ralph Michaels. And Ralph, let's start with some Friday college football before we get into the weekend. We have Saturday and Sunday games, of course, but a little Friday night action, Cincinnati, BYU. Ralph, what are you doing with this game?
You know, I like the Bearcats, and I can understand. You look at Cincinnati, they're off back-to-back losses to Miami of Ohio and Oklahoma. BYU started the season 3-0, two very weak foes to start the season. You go to Arkansas, you pull the upset, but it should be noted in that upset, they got outgained 424 to 281. Last week, they lose at Kansas. But I look at this matchup, and I compare the offenses, and I give a slight edge to BYU. The issue is, though, yes, you have Keaton Slovis, and yes, he's completing 60%. But I'll also say this. You're only completing 60%, and you started the season with those two weak foes. BYU is one of the most one-dimensional offenses there is in football. You're still without your running back number one, who's been injured, Robbins. They've been going to the freshman. Robbins is still too banged up to play. You are also missing an offensive line starter for this game. The Bearcats defense has been solid. I'm not going to say dynamic because they allowed 425 yards to Oklahoma, but Oklahoma was inside the red zone 6 times and only scored 20 points last week. A very bend but break defense. I'll go back to their loss 2 games ago against Miami of Ohio. Was that a flat spot? Yes. It was also a big brother spot. Remember, Cincinnati had gone to Pittsburgh. They pulled the upset. They had their first ever Big 12 game at home against Oklahoma on deck. And while they did lose in overtime to Miami, they still had a 538 to 358 yard edge. Again, BYU very one-dimensional, can't run the ball. Cincinnati's back 7 has held foes to 53%. Their D-line has held opponents to 3.5 yards rushing. And if you're watching this game late tonight, watch Corleone in the middle for Cincinnati. While he's not quite Aaron Donald, this may be the most disruptive nose guard in all of football. He is awesome to watch. He can be a havoc wrecker for BYU. I'm on the Bearcats, and of the 4 new Big 12 teams, I have Cincinnati to get the first Big 12 win amongst the new group.
Sure, and it's kind of bizarre to see Cincinnati and BYU as a Big 12 matchup, but that's exactly what it is, Ralph. I want to ask you about the state of this Bearcats program, because obviously they had a heck of a run with Luke Fickell. Now it's Scott Satterfield. Coming into the season, expectations weren't nearly as high. Their signature win this year against Pitt has basically been devalued. Pitt's not any good. We've seen that now pretty clearly since that initial defeat. And BYU's a battle-tested team. Say what you want. We know they faced Arkansas and Kansas on the road the last couple of weeks. BYU has faced quality competition. I'm not convinced that Cincy has. So are you worried at all about the quality competition Cincy's faced? And do you feel like this Bearcats program is capable of taking this step and being competitive in the Big 12? Because I look at Cincy, I'm like, you had a nice run under Fickell. I'm not convinced they're going to have anything near that in the Satterfield era.
Well, you were still going to Pittsburgh. You were playing a good MAC team, and you've played Oklahoma. And in fact, when I look at strength of schedule, I look at Sagarin's numbers. I think, when you add in the FCS, his are the best. Cincinnati has actually faced the number 53 schedule. BYU has faced the number 93 schedule. So while perspective says you may think BYU has been more tested because they played Arkansas and Kansas on the road, looking at the dead numbers with Oklahoma and Pittsburgh and Miami of Ohio, since he has the stronger schedule. Yes, Satterfield, you have a new coach, you're in a new conference. So while the expectations may not be the same, I still think there's a lot of excitement to get this Big 12 win. I'm not worried about it. The offense when you have to count on the offense, that's one thing. And remember, Cincinnati only turned 3 starters. Emory Jones isn't quite the rusher he was last year. He was a little banged up early. But when I have the better defense against the one-dimensional offense, I'm not worried about that situation.
Ralph Michaels, WagerTalk.com. You can follow him on Twitter at CalSportsLV and follow him on Instagram as well, the WagerTalk channel on Instagram also. Some great charts on a daily basis. And Ralph, speaking of charts, let's get to one of them before we do a select NFL game here. And, the bye weeks are starting to pop here in the near future for the next several months in the NFL. And I always thought look-aheads is something that's interesting to talk about both in college and pro football. And you can consider the bye week a little bit of a look ahead as well. So how do you treat buys when they're on deck for NFL teams?
You know what, guys? I think this is one of the most eye-opening charts because Joe Public doesn't think about it. We all talk about teams after the bye, but who in the world talks about teams before the NFL bye? Teddy, I think we talked about this here on the show last year, and it really is eye-opening, and it changed the way I look at bye weeks. Think about it. An NFL team is prepping for their game before their bye. They're going to spend times with friends and family. Do you want to go into the bye in a positive mindset or a negative mindset? Well, let's look at the data. I go back since 2015. I use that date often because that's when they moved the extra point back. And all I could do is say, look at these numbers. If you blindly bet home favorites and home dogs the game before their bye, you have cashed 64.9% and 64.3%. If you're a road team before the bye, an away favorite has cashed 58%, an away dog 50%. So will I bet a home team prior to a bye? I'll tell you what, it's going to have to be a very, very strong analysis to make that situation. But for the most part, I won't. I added the over-unders on the bottom. And if you see on the over-unders in the blue heading, I listed them differently. On the top, you see home favorites and home dogs, then away favorites and away dogs. But take a look at below in the blue. I have the home favorite and away favorite on the top. Look at those over-under numbers, 56.8% and 70% to the under. If you're a dog before the bye, you've gone 41.5% to the over and 34.5% to the under.
Sure, that's a heck of a chart, and that is absolutely an eye-opening chart. Ralph, I want to ask you about the neutral site games because we've had more and more of them in recent years in the NFL. We've had games in Mexico City. We have games all over Europe. How do the neutral, because a lot of times teams will play their international game before their bye week. How do those neutral site games get factored into that chart?
They don't, Teddy. Those are just true home, true away. There are no neutral games listed in that site. And I do want to just comment on what you said, Teddy. We've seen over the last few years that many coaches aren't taking the buys early in the year. If you play an international game, the NFL asks you, do you want your bye after that week? Or would you like it later in the season? And the GM has the decision to make that. And we've seen a trend recently over the last couple of years. If you're playing an early season international game, teams are not taking that bye in that role.
Yeah, Ralph, that's over 200 games sample there when you factor in all 4 subsets. And the worst one is break even, like you said, 29-29. Obviously not break even with the juice, but that's 59%, I believe, with my math overall, just playing all those teams before their bye weeks. So that's a pretty strong data set there from the chart master, Ralph Michaels. And once again, you follow Ralph on Twitter at CalSportsLV. And also, if you would like to get his package for the first time and you're a new customer, you can try him out for just $5, and it includes a 5% best bet in college football with New Ralph. New Ralph. Teddy, your thoughts? You're muted.
My fault. I muted myself. Dog's barking. Stupid dog. Better not have that on there. My apologies. The 4 teams that are on buys next week: Cleveland, LA Chargers, Seattle, Tampa Bay. So those are the 4 teams that would fall into Ralph's category for this week because they're all on bye next week. Steve?
And that's a fantastic segue to Ralph Michaels' Cleveland Browns. His former Cleveland Browns, now once again his Cleveland Browns, were mentioned. So, Ralph, Do you like them this week against the Ravens, your former Cleveland Browns?
I do like Cleveland this week. And obviously, the bye situation is just a small part. We're never going to base a play on the pre-bye situation. But I want to add one caveat, guys. When you have the bye teams and you're playing a division foe before the bye and you have a division foe on deck, you have actually gone 78.6%. And that is the Browns. Excuse me, that is not the Browns. My apologies. That is another situation I was looking at. What I was wanted to bring up for this game is this. Hot versus cold. Cleveland off a win, Baltimore off a loss. I went to the database for this. If you have a team that won and covered like the Browns, playing a team that lost and failed to cover like Baltimore, and the line is between the threes, going back all the way to 2018, those teams are 61% against the spread with a sample size of over 140 games. But the Cleveland Browns, do they pass the eye test to me? Absolutely. They're 2-1. If this team were 3-0, I think this line would be closer to 4.5 or 5. Why? If you've not watched this Browns defense, it is legitimately a top 1, 2, or 3 defense in the league. Yes, we're only 3 games in, but if you have allowed only 3.3 yards per play on defense, you are an elite defense. But even better, how about allowing 7 first downs per game? You've played 3 games and you've allowed 21 first downs. We know Baltimore wants to run the ball. The Browns defense can do that. They're allowing foes 2.8 yards per carry. While Baltimore's defense is actually number 2 in the league behind Cleveland, there's a huge gap between that number 1 and number 2. And let's remember this. Baltimore faced Houston in the opener. That was a rookie quarterback making his first start. Both teams faced the Bengals, of course. The Browns held them to 142 yards. The Bengals had 282 yards. And then you played Tennessee, an offense that we know, you played Indianapolis, a team you still allowed another rookie quarterback, 327 yards. And to complete on the season, they're allowing 63.6% completions. I like Cleveland in this game. The defense is legit. Yes, Chubb is one of the most massive injuries in the NFL this season. We saw the rookie Ford step up a bit last week. They rushed for 78 yards, but only 2.5 yards per carry. But Kirby now back in. Remember, he came in on Monday or Tuesday last week and played a few snaps this week. There'll be many more plays in the mix for Cleveland. And I'm going to jump ahead, Teddy, and say, well, what about this? That Teddy Covers would ask me. I do want to point out this, and you have to factor this in. The Baltimore Ravens, their last 24 games as a dog, 20 ATS wins, 3 ATS losses, and a push. So do factor that in. But even with that, I still lean the Browns.
So since the start of the show, Ralph, since this show began, Cleveland was -2.5, -3. And in the last half hour, in the last 20 minutes, we've seen the money pour in on the Ravens. That's down to -1. I'm seeing pick'ems on the WagerTalk live odds screen. Any idea what the deluge of money for the Ravens is coming in literally as we speak right now? And does that concern you at all that we're seeing the wise guys make a big move on Baltimore live right here on WagerTalk Today?
I don't have the answer, Teddy. If it's the wise guys making a move, I'm not concerned. If it's a data point that's moving the line because of an injury or something happened, then yes, I'm concerned. You know, if all of a sudden, let's see, we're missing 2 of our defensive linemen, but I don't have that information being on with you, so I don't know. I'm never concerned if the wise guys are moving a line. If I haven't bet it, and I haven't bet this game yet, it's still in the mix for me, then hey, I'm getting a better line. So don't have an answer why it's moved. Don't have an answer if it affects me until I find out why that line moved.
Sure, there is. Baltimore's injury list is as long as it gets. So I think there may be a handful of Ravens that have been upgraded slightly. That, in my opinion, is probably why the money's coming from Baltimore. That or that 20-3 angle that you were just talking about, Steve.
Yeah, and as Teddy Covers is referencing, the WagerTalk live odds screen is free for everybody. Just go to wagertalk.com, click on live odds. You can click on individual sports books with a consensus, and you'll see exactly when these lines move. And one thing I always look for, guys, with these rapid line moves is to see if both the side and total moved at the same time, because that tells you it's probably based on some players or whatnot. The total did not move until 12:03 Eastern, dropped half a point down to the 40. But the side was moving for the last couple hours, 3, 2.5, and then at exact same time went from 2.5 down to 1. So obviously that would tell me an offensive guy most likely for Cleveland, Teddy, is probably more questionable maybe than he was.
It's not a Cleveland. I'm not seeing anything for Cleveland in terms of questions. I'm seeing a bunch of guys for Baltimore questionable. I think the in my having not studied it opinion, I would think that maybe some of the rave that's going to be positive for Baltimore as opposed to negative for Cleveland.
But the lines dropped from Cleveland 2.5 to -1, correct?
Right. So that's positive for Baltimore. Baltimore's guys
you're
got
saying
plenty of
guys
their
are back
that
in.
are-
Okay. Yeah, I got you. With the total
That's-
dropping half a point, though, so do you think maybe that's some defensive players, I guess, would be the way that might be going?
I mean, I've got Bateman, Wallace, Beckham all questionable, Justice Hill questionable, Tyler Lindbaum questionable, Ronnie Stanley questionable on the offensive line for Baltimore. It's just some of them. I'm just glancing. So certainly if offensive linemen or receivers are playing when we think the total would go up. So I'm not sure why the total got bet down there.
Yeah, interesting. But it's another great use of the WagerTalk live odds screen at wagertalk.com. And Ralph, I hinted on it earlier. If you're a new user, if it's your first-time viewer, first-time customer to WagerTalk, Ralph, fantastic special. New Ralph, $5. Get your best bets, including a 5%. Tell us how to use that.
That's right. You're saving $34. I have a Friday, Saturday college football all access with a top-rated 5% play. If you go to WagerTalk, you'll see that package is $39. If you've never purchased anything at WagerTalk, use the code NEWRALPH, NEWRALPH. Get my entire Friday, Saturday college football package for $5. We appreciate old-time and long-time customers, but I'll tell you what, we want you newbies to jump on board as well.
Yeah, and if you're bought before and you're not a newbie, you can't get the $5 deal. You can get the rest of all sports, including Ralph's Best Bets, every day for the rest of 2023 for just $7 a day. And there's no promo code needed. That special is available right now for everybody. You see the details right there on the screen. The rest of the year, 2023, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, soccer, fighting, whatever anybody does, for just $7 a day. And that's available through this weekend only. Get multiple cappers. Take advantage of a fantastic all sports, all access special for everyone right now at wagertalk.com. All right, let's keep it rolling. We're going to have Carmine Bianco on in just a moment. Also going to have Arthur DiCesare from the Westgate in Las Vegas. Looking forward to talking to Art as we head into the football weekend. But Teddy, first I want to talk to you a little bit. Let's do a What's Bettors Learn segment and give me a little college football talk here.
Absolutely. This stood out like a sore thumb last night. Sam, and I know it's of all the games last night, this was the lowest profile game. Sam Houston State against Jacksonville State. I get it. But it was on TV. I watched it, and it stood out like a sore thumb. Sam Houston State came into last night's game having scored 10 points in 3 games. They had 1 touchdown in 12 quarters. Their leading receivers were all out. Their top running back was out. They were playing QB shuffle. Their leading rusher came into the game with 43 yards. Leading rusher, 43 yards for the season. Leading receiver came into the game with 74 yards for the season. Obviously, the offense can't score. The Bearcats are a mess. Not so fast, my friend. Who have they played? Late September, that matters a lot. Early October, that matters a lot. Now, just because the team's only faced weaklings doesn't mean they're good. Just because the team has only faced strong teams doesn't mean they're bad, and vice versa. But Ralph Michaels, who was just on, his stat sheet tells the story. It's a free download on his page every week. And just go to wagertalk.com over to Ralph's page and check out the free download for college football. Sam Houston had played the number 6 schedule in the country. Jacksonville State had played number 168. No wonder Jacksonville State looks good. No wonder they're favored. Sam Houston had played BYU, Air Force, and Houston. All bigger, faster, stronger than they are. All better defensively by far than Jacksonville State. So now it's a national TV game at home. +7, total of 36. And it was a brutal push. The Bearcats were the right side. They were up 8 with less than a minute to play. Couldn't hold it. And they gave up a touchdown and the 2-point conversion and lost by a TD in overtime. But the total was 36. And the team that had scored 7 points in 3 games scored 4 touchdowns. They scored 28. Be very careful using averages in college football right now. Pay attention to teams that have only faced weaklings, now stepping up in class, or teams that are undervalued, having faced the strong, now stepping down in class to fake the weak. Again, this time of year in college football is arguably my number one strategy. Take advantage. Steve?
Yeah, we talk a lot about handicap in football in segments, right? And you have to be careful from underreacting to week one results in the NFL. It's basically preseason part 4. But I also think you got to be careful playing the contrarian angle week 1 or 2 or 3, because sometimes teams do struggle for multiple weeks. But once you get about 4 or 5 games in, whether it's college or pro football, is when I start to look to maybe play the contrarian angle, on teams that maybe played a really tough schedule, like you said, or had a new coach, new offensive scheme, took a couple weeks. And I think we're in that sweet spot right now for the next couple of weeks in college and pro football, where we might start to see some results that don't correlate to what we saw the first few weeks of the season. I mean, Teddy, do you kind of approach this as that second segment of the college football season right now?
Absolutely. Right here, this week, next week. And the concept that you talk about this a lot, Stephen, in my mind, one of the most important concepts in handicapping is it's not the season. It's this little portion of the season. And this is our strategy for early season NFL. This is our strategy for early mid season. We get 4 games in. And this is our strategy for later. Same thing in college football. You have your early non-conference. And you have your transition here in late September, early October. Then you have the heart of conference play. Then you have your late conference play. Then you have your bowl season. There are different times of year, and your handicapping strategy absolutely changes as the year progresses. This time of year, I'm looking for teams that they look terrible, but now you see it more in the lesser conference, the Conference USA or Sun Belt or MAC, where the teams have stepped up 3 or 4 times already, and now they're stepping back down. And those teams tend to be undervalued. Whereas teams that have faced nothing but weaklings so far, they can be overvalued this time of the year, especially when you're talking about these non-high profile schools in college football.
Well, exactly. And that's the whole thing with September. You get these non-conference matchups, Sun Belt versus SEC games each week, MAC playing the big boys. And then you also get the FCS teams playing the FBS teams. And you got to be so careful, like you said, using averages, because you play 4 games and one of them's a 50-point win against a bad 1AA team. It really skews the numbers. That's another reason I like to factor in opponents' averages as well. That really jumps out to me when you look at the opponents and then you see what they're allowing or gaining on them as well. So good info. And by the way, this is something I talk about pretty much in detail in my college football top 25 video this week, which went live last night. So check it out here on WagerTalk TV. I did a bonus game, Kentucky, Florida, because Kentucky's 27th in both polls, yet they're a home favorite against ranked Florida. And they've played a really weak schedule, but they've looked good so far against it. And I broke that game down as a bonus game. So recommend people go check that out later today here on WagerTalk TV, my college football top 25 report. All right, I caught some slack because I said it was Canadian free on Wednesday, and some viewers got upset because they said I was dissing Canada. So we're bringing on Carmine Bianco because we don't have the Prez today. We got to get our Canadian quota, and he is by far my favorite Canadian. Don't tell the Prez I said that, Carmine, but you are as good as they get. And you're also pretty darn good in the NFL. Even though you guys don't technically have an NFL team, the Bills are pretty close. You crushed it last year in the first month. You did pretty well in segment 1 of the NFL season, to say the least, last year in the circa millions, cashing, I believe, over $100,000. And we're going to get to your pick 5 in just a moment. But before we do that, Carm, let's get to a player prop. I haven't talked any props on today's show, so give us something to look at this Sunday in the NFL.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, guys. I just because you guys were obviously discussing what could have caused that line move in the Cleveland game. I was able to look up a few things that are going on. It could be, Teddy, it could be people jumping the injury report that comes out at 12:45. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the rookie, took all the snaps at practice today for Cleveland. Watson was there, but did not participate. 12:45 is when the injury report comes out. So it could be people looking at that and saying he may not play. And let's grab the plus threes.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
so
I don't mean to cut you off, but yes,
when that report
that has
out,
to be why the money's come for Baltimore right now. Is if Watson didn't practice this morning and DRT did, that's going to move the market. Yeah, excellent.
And the total's actually dropped to 39 since I said 40, Teddy. Now it's down to 39. So we're seeing an under Baltimore move, which is obviously an offensive thing for Cleveland. So that makes perfect sense.
Yep.
So doing that, what bettors learned gave me some time to research it for you, Teddy. So there you go.
Oh, thank you, Carl. That's awesome.
But yeah,
That's awesome.
Listen, Uh, so the prop I want to talk about is the Cincinnati Tennessee game, and it's the Jamar Chase over 81.5 yards. Last season, only played in 12 games, went over that number in 7 of 12. He averaged 11 targets last year, 7 receptions per game. And those 5 games where he stayed under the number were against defenses that were a lot better than this Tennessee defense is: Dallas, the Jets, Baltimore, Tampa, New England. So, and he's got Joe Burrow back after missing most of, if not all of, the preseason. Burrow's slowly working himself back into shape, obviously with that injury problem. But last week, 141 yards, I think he put up last week on 12 catches, and Zach Taylor moved him around the field. He put him in different types of pass catching situations, moved around the field, and it worked. A good wide receiver needs a good quarterback, and that is obviously what Joe Burrow is. It's going to be difficult if you look at it. Murphy Bunting and Fulton are going to have a tough time this week covering, because it's not just Jamar Chase. You got T. Higgins, who played in the game last year where Jamar Chase missed the game against Tennessee last year, and he caught, I believe it was 7 passes for 114 yards in that game. The Titans defensively, 3 games this year, they've allowed 289 receiving yards. Amari Cooper, 116 yards. 305 yards to the Chargers. Keenan Allen, 111 yards. New Orleans, 305 receiving yards. Chris Olave, 112 yards. So the top receivers are catching and gaining yards, and 81.5 just seems low to me in this spot. I still think Tennessee can make a game of this, and we'll talk about it in that next segment. Because obviously, I think the best defense is a good offense, and we'll see in the next segment whether Tennessee. I think this is going to be a good game. I think we're going to see points from both teams, but I'm taking Jamar Chase over 81.5 receiving yards.
Well, let's talk about this, because this next segment is interesting. It's something that we tried to do last week. We kind of ran out of time. This week, we have a little bit of time to talk about it. Not a ton of time, but enough time for you to at least get the picks in. You wanted to talk about your Circa Millions Pick 5. And obviously last year, the first quartile of the season, Carmine Bianco with the big cardboard check for $100,000. That was pretty cool. Go to his page, check out those pictures. And of course, it was good for a steak dinner for me. So I loved it even more. Carm celebrating here in Las Vegas. But talk about
Anytime.
Who you picked in the Circa Millions contest this week and why you picked them. Go.
All right, we're going to start it off with Jacksonville. Yes, this is the game in London, and I get it. It is a home game for Jacksonville, but they're only like 4-5 in these games, and they're going to stay there because they're going to play the Bills the following week in England, in the UK as well too. But I think a change of scenery for this Jacksonville team is what they need. It hasn't been the greatest of seasons offensively for them, but you look at them defensively. 4 sacks against the Colts, 65 yards, rushing yards allowed. Against KC, only 17 points allowed. 3 turnovers in that game, 1 sack, only 101 yards rushing. And I faded Atlanta last week on the show against Detroit. That worked out great for me because I just thought Ryder and that offensive line would struggle, and they certainly did. I think it was like 9 sacks in that game. I'm looking at similar to this game here. So I'm looking for Jacksonville in this one, a get well spot. I'm laying the 3 points in the Circa contest. The Bills, -3. It's currently at 2.5 right now, juiced to the 2.5 at -120. It might have come down a bit because Poyer was ruled out today for the Bills. But I think it's a lower number than we would normally expect. And I think it's because of the fact that the Dolphins put up 70 last week. But this isn't the Buffalo's offense, isn't the Denver Broncos offense. And their defense is definitely not the Broncos defense. The Bills defense showed up last week, 5 turnovers, 9 sacks, 1 defensive touchdown. They're going to have to slow down this Miami team that are extremely fast. But I think they can do it and win by at least a field goal in this game. Cowboys, 6.5. Lines remain the same. Let's give the Cards some credit. They've had the lead in three games heading into the fourth quarter. They beat Dallas last week. A good bounce back spot here. I think this Dallas defense, even with Diggs out, is still a very good defense. This is one of the top 3 teams in the NFC. and that defense is going to give Mac Jones fits all game long. Tennessee, we just talked about that game. I'm taking the +2. It's at +2.5 right now. I'm taking them divisional home dog. A bad loss last week, and I think we're going to see more of Derrick Henry. We didn't see him last week, and this is what I mean about a good defense is a good offense. And if they can run the ball and establish the run with Henry and keep that Bengals offensive unit off the field, it bodes well to them covering the spread and possibly getting an outright win. And finally, Baltimore +2.5. I wish I had listened to Marco. They were caught in the sandwich spot last week. +2.5. They're now down to +1. They played Cincinnati the week before, Cleveland this week, and then they played the Colts and laid pretty much an egg, but some terrible play calling in that game and mistakes by Baltimore. I'm going to take Baltimore to win this game outright, so I'm getting the 2.5 points, which is a bonus.
Look at that, man. Carmine with the chef hat on, looking sharp. That's the most efficient 5 minutes for 5 NFL picks you will see all week on WagerTalk TV. And keep in mind, he won over 100 grand this month last year in this exact contest. So you might want to pay attention. He's already got a couple points of line value as we speak right now in that Baltimore game within the last few minutes. And Carm, that Jacksonville situation is so incredible to me. They stay overseas next week, and they get to play Buffalo, who has a huge game against Miami this week. And by the way, the Bills have the Sunday night game the week after that against the Giants, but still the Sunday night primetime game. So just one of the most fascinating scheduling spots I've seen in recent years in the NFL. We'll have to see how that plays out the next couple weeks for the Jacksonville/London Jaguars. Carm, $20 discount instantly with promo code CARM20, and it includes a 5% football play, L football, because you also do EPL. You've got a strong soccer play this weekend along with those powerful NFL and other sports. Tell us how to use it.
Yeah, it's been a good last 30 days, up almost 55 units. That's a 3-day all access. So you're going to get all the plays, which is EPL, a 5% play going. Haven't lost an EPL game yet this season. A 5% EPL play this season. Plus, there's 3 other EPL plays. There's 3 college plays. And of course, there's 4 NFL plays that go on Sunday. And then any soccer that I release on Sunday. You're going to get them all in this package and a couple plays that are already up for today. So you can get 3 days, every single play for $49 if you use that coupon code CARM20 for a 3-day all access.
Once again, instant $20 discount for that 3-day all access. Carmine Bianco, use promo code CARM20, CARM20 at WagerTalk.com. All right, Teddy, he just broke down 5 NFL games, but we saved the biggest NFL game of the week, perhaps the biggest NFL game of the season. No, not the Dolphins-Bills. They had a trigger. Teddy and I talked that on Wednesday. We're doing a game I did a solo video on. It's so big earlier this week here on WagerTalk TV. So big game breakdown, to say the least. Give it to us here. Broncos-Bears.
It is time for today's big game breakdown. Let's talk the game we all want to watch. The 0-3 Broncos against the 0-3 Bears. Both teams coming off pretty ugly showings last week. The question is, which team more likely to be able to bounce back? And the betting markets are telling us that. Denver, -3. Winless Denver, -3. Winless Denver off a 70-point outing in which they gave up 10 touchdowns and no field goals, is a 3-point favorite on the road at Soldier Field in Chicago. For good reason. Of the 2 teams, Denver, underachieving, absolutely. Coming off an embarrassing loss, absolutely. Enough talent and good enough coaching to turn that around? Absolutely. All right. When we look at the Chicago side of the equation, this team reminds me right now of Michigan State. They're just unbackable. When you face off-field adversity, like Chicago has faced, as well as on-field adversity, this team's 0-13 straight up their last 13 games. There's no home field edge in Chicago whatsoever. We talk about, can the problems be fixed? Denver's problems, boy, that team was embarrassed. You read those quotes, that team's mad and hungry. You read the quotes from Chicago, and that team's falling apart. Broncos are chalk for good reason. Bears have no defense. They have no offense. I'm not going to criticize Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields has hope. The Bears don't. Lay it with Denver if you're going to play it. There's your big game breakdown. Back to you, Mr. Merrill.
Yeah, Teddy, as I mentioned, we do standalone videos, all of us, for every single NFL game this week at wagertalk.com. Check it here on WagerTalk TV. And this was one of the games I broke down. And it's funny, going in, I was like, what am I going to do with this? And I made fun. I told people in the comments, let me know if you're a sports bettor or a fan. I make the over under 90% sports bettors are watching this video. But the more I started analyzing it, I did start liking Denver. And I had Ralph Michaels send me over the data on when 0-3 straight up teams play each other in week 4. And it's only happened, I believe, 16 times in the last 30 plus years. And it's actually happening twice this week. Vikings Panthers is another 0-3 battle. And the road team, the dog, as you would expect, has done all right because you don't want to play bad favorites. But I dug deeper into the stats he sent me, and there's been 5 road favorites over the last 30 years. And those road favorites have actually gone 4-1 straight up in ATS, and both Minnesota and Denver qualify. So I know it's only a 5-game sample, but all 4 wins by 3 points or more. And I think it makes sense. And the fact that Denver was embarrassed last week, I think they'll take this game more serious. And the one thing that jumped out to me was the difference at quarterback. I mean, Fields is playing his way out of the NFL. Yes, Russell Wilson might be on the back half of his career, but that's a pretty big difference. Maybe a future Hall of Famer against Fields. So I'm leaning Denver as well. We'll see it stays -3 or less. Fun game to talk about, and I love that Teddy had it in his big game breakdown. All right, one of my favorite segments of the entire week, to say the least, is talking to Arthur DiCesare from the Westgate Superbook in Las Vegas. And we're going to combine this with our BS question as well, our better segment question. So let's bring in Art, and we'll pull up a graphic as well. Art, I'm going to throw this to you with no prep time, and you might not have an opinion on it. Teddy and I had light opinions on it, but we had a viewer on Wednesday. I was talking a little financial markets, and great question coming in. It said, since I like bringing up business and politics, and we talked about election betting markets as well Wednesday, do you think all the recent progress in AI, artificial intelligence, will have an impact on gambling from either a market setting or a regulation standpoint? Or is it there already? You know, a lot of things to break down. And by the way, appreciate the questions as always for the BS segment, and keep them coming here in the comments on YouTube. We'll get to as many as we can. That was from Nick Lalick. Nick Lalick. Thank you, Nick. And Art, I'll throw it to you first, and we'll get Teddy's take as well. But have you started to see any changes with AI, artificial intelligence? I mean, the one thing that jumped out to me was maybe the in-game betting, how that's become very automated. Art, your thoughts on this in general?
There's definitely a concern with the in game, but we also look at, a lot of people are kind of hooked into screens, seeing moves or even getting ahead of moves. So, and we can't say for sure if that's AI or whatever the case may be, but there's definitely a concern of that when everything is tied in with technology and there's a lag or people are ahead or whatever the case may be, because as bookmakers, obviously we got to stay on top of things and we have to move things accordingly. Just like, today, if Deshaun Watson is not practicing and, someone gets ahead of us or whatever the case may be, that's important for us to make sure we've moved before we don't get hit by certain groups. So, it's always something that's evolving and growing, but I don't think we've seen anything really yet that's been oh, this is jumping out at us and we really need to stay on top of it. It's kind of business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about AI, when we talk about some of the math that the wise guys are using, in their algorithms and their models, is there a huge difference? I mean, I'm not an AI expert. I have no freaking idea. All right. But some of the stuff that the sharp bettors are doing to spit out numbers there's a lot of math. It's pretty high-end, high-end equations. I'm not convinced that AI is going to be better at that in any way than what people have already developed. I'll take the under on the amount of influence AI has on winning sports bets. I'm not saying they're not going to have influence in the markets, but on winning sports bets, I mean, it's maybe I become obsolete, but my hunch is AI is my gut reaction to AI is going to have a hard time picking winners against the spread. Steve?
Yeah, well, I'll use the financial market analogy once again, which is part of that question, because I always feel like the financial markets are bigger, lead the way, and the sports betting markets are kind of small micro. And we've had quant traders now for decades in the financial markets, right? Everything's automated, bot traders. And one thing also you've started to see with Twitter and whatnot is they will invest based on sentiment, and indications they see from tweets, and that is all automated. So I thought Art touched on something very interesting that I had not thought about. where, you could set up some models, and they might be set up now where they see trigger words, Deshaun Watson not practice, for example. They just hit it. They have it set up to hit it, and then they buy back later if they want to get off that side. So that might be something. But like you said, Teddy, as far as picking winners or for the average Joe handicapper sitting back doing his own work, that's already going to be priced in, and it's not going to affect us too much. Things just might move sharper and in more unison. But we've seen that now for a decade. You no longer find middles. You can't find 2 or 3 point middles like you used to 15 years ago on soft numbers at books. So I think a lot of it's built in, and it'll continue to move faster and sharper, and the markets will be more efficient probably in both the commodities, financial markets, and the sports betting markets as well. Any final thoughts, guys?
It was an interesting question. It really is. And the answer is, the answer can only be we don't know, but we can guess. Art?
We can. But one thing we do know, Teddy, is that there'll be a lot of action this weekend from humans, not just bots. And Art, I want to get to some football look here for you. Where do you want to start? College, pro? What's on your mind here as we head into a huge weekend of football?
Start in college. Obviously we got some games tonight, so there's a couple of those games to touch on. The Louisiana Tech at UTEP game. We've seen sharps on both sides. That that number has kind of been flipping. -1 each side. We've now settled at pick. The total's really seen good movement. It was as high as 53. It's now 50.5. Utah at Oregon State. That might be the best game of the whole college football slate, and it ends up being on a Friday. Obviously, the Pac-12 has been a great conference with some really good teams. Sharps early in the week laid the 2.5 with Oregon. They laid Oregon State. They laid the 3, got to 3.5, got to 4, and then we actually got to 4.5 yesterday, and then saw some buybacks from a sharp guy at Utah plus 4.5. So that's been pretty good, two-way action. Probably a little bit more money on Oregon State right now as we look at it sitting here early in the afternoon in Vegas. Sharps and publics have kind of divided themselves on a bunch of games here in college. The public is on A&M. They laid the 6.5. It's now 6. So it went against them. They took over in Tennessee, 62, went down to 61.5. And they even laid it with Penn State at 27, went down to 26. Sharps are on UConn plus 6 at home against Utah State. That's now 4. They took Troy early in the week at plus 2.5. Game went to pick at some point, has now gone back to plus 1. I know you guys, Steve, you had touched on that Florida-Kentucky game. We had a sharp guy take Florida a couple of times at plus 3 early in the week. That's now down to 1. South Alabama saw a lot of love early in the week. Plus 4, plus 3.5, now down to 2.5. And a big move for a total and an over. LSU's over was 63.5. It's now 67.5. And that was a sharp guy. And then another sharp guy who hit it after at 64.5. So 2 different sharps taking the over in LSU.
And that, of course, an ESPN game, LSU at Ole Miss. A handful of specific games I want to ask you about, just because they stand out to me. We have Texas versus Kansas, the only matchup of undefeateds. We have Duke versus Notre Dame, the only matchup of 2 4-win teams other than Texas, Kansas. So those 2 games in particular, I want to ask you. And, of course, I got to ask you about USC, Colorado, because everyone wants to know about Colorado. So if you can give me those 3 games in particular, Art, let me know where the money's flowing on that trio.
So just quickly on USC, Colorado, I think we might be off on the public wanting to take Colorado on a money line. We saw that a lot last week. They were, that was a spread where Oregon really should have been minus 1,200, minus 1,400, minus 1,600. And, some places minus 700, minus 800. So people were really sweating Colorado as that big, underdog. Now, it's a little bit different this week. They're at home, but you just don't see people wanting to line up and take Colorado on the money line this week. People want to take the over. There's no surprise there. Notre Dame, Duke, there's really no – it's kind of two-way on the side. The one thing we've seen on the total is the total's gone up. It's 51, now 53. So you've seen some money come in there. And I think that Kansas-Texas game, which is definitely underrated, Texas is in an interesting spot because they obviously have the Red River Shootout next week. So you're not going to overlook an undefeated team and a conference team and a team who has some offensive firepower, but people want to take the over in that game. That's kind of the lean there. It's kind of like the Duke-Notre Dame game where there's not really much yet on the side. I think the public will be happy to lay the number with Texas, and there will be some people who probably are a little bit more sharp who want to take Kansas. But in both those big matchups, the Notre Dame Duke and Kansas and Texas over money has come in, moved both those games up either 1.5 or 2 points.
It's Arthur DiCesare, risk management supervisor, risk manager at Westgate Superbook in Las Vegas, and always enjoy talking to him Fridays here on WagerTalk Today, live at noon Eastern. He's on about 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 Pacific, but archived 24/7 here on WagerTalk TV. Another great reason to hit subscribe and hit the bell for instant alerts when these shows and all the videos go live all week long. And don't forget to comment below as well. We appreciate that BS question, the better segment question on the artificial intelligence. Leave us some questions. The Prez will be back next week with Teddy, and they'll need some segments here on the show to talk about, so we might get you mentioned on the show live on WagerTalk Today. And Art, great take on college football. A lot of sharp action there. What are you seeing in the NFL? Any sharp moves, any games stand out to you this Sunday into Monday?
Yeah, I think you just have to touch on the Miami-Buffalo game. And from a standpoint of, is there action on either side? It's kind of split right now, but I always like to look at a look-ahead line when it's a big game. Look-ahead line on that was going to be Buffalo 5.5. I think that shows now that Miami on a neutral is basically a pick 'em. Miami at home is going to be not a nice size favorite, but kind of where Buffalo is at the 2.5, 3 points. So the gap has closed between Buffalo and Miami as far as a power rating standpoint, as far as a booking standpoint, because Miami has looked so great. Buffalo's looked great the last 2 weeks as well. Don't get me wrong. They've played nobody, but they've bombed those teams. So you got to give them credit for that. They played bad teams, and they beat those bad teams. Monday night, interesting. Jets took money. We saw Jet money come in last night at 9.5. And, it got all the way down to 8. Now we bumped back up to 8.5. So interesting to see that. Public's on Cincinnati. Public, I think, saw Burrow on Monday night. Maybe he didn't look great, but they got off the snide. They got a big win. Very tough to go into Tennessee, the way they play and run and play defense, but Tennessee hasn't looked great. Tannehill has not been good. Public's happy to lay the 2, now 2.5 with the Bengals. Sharps were on Cleveland early, but now obviously with that injury news, there's obviously groups who have come back and bet Baltimore. That game is at 1. Sharps have been on Houston all week. +3 at home. Pittsburgh, they got a nice win. The Raiders helped them, the coaching staff, but Houston getting 3 at home. Pittsburgh's offense doesn't look that great. Houston's, rookie quarterback has looked pretty good. The London game, very interesting. 2-way action on that game. People were taking Atlanta +3. They were laying it with Jacksonville. We've kind of just moved the juice on that game. Really haven't got off the 3. We're either -120 one way or the other way. So that's been kind of good 2-way. And then Sharps took New England early in the week at +7. Dallas now -6.5. Dallas is going to be big for us in the sense that we'll be rooting against them because off the loss, they'll be in all money line parlays. They'll be in all teasers because you can get them down to, pick them -0.5, whatever it is. So we will be rooting for New England despite the early sharp money on +7.
We've got just a moment left here with Art DiCesare at ArtDice21 on Twitter. He's an excellent follow. Art, I have two more questions I want to ask you. And the first one's quick. If I'm fading the public in the NFL this week, what's the one bet to make? What's on all the parlay cards or the 2 bets to make?
I think if you're fading the public this week, it's probably take Tennessee. Because I think, the public action is really on Cincinnati because they feel Burrow is quote-unquote back.
All right. And I know it's Football Friday, but it is also the last weekend of MLB. Real quick, what are you seeing in terms of baseball action for the weekend with the pennant races and the wild card races in particular on center stage this weekend?
The one thing I can say, because there's nothing really sharp to report, but the big thing we've seen over these last couple of days, when people clinch or people are in certain spots where they're going to rest people after they've had their champagne and, all that, numbers really start come down. Totals come down a point and a half. It's really, you really got to stay on top of baseball these next couple of days because of the clinching scenarios. So it's very important for us to know maybe we don't put up an overnight line for, let's say, Baltimore last night because they can clinch the division with the win. So very important for us to stay on top of those scenarios.
Man, I'll tell you what, Teddy covers, and I've been doing this a long time, but he honestly just had the exact 2 questions I was hoping to squeeze in because I'm about to record my NFL Fade the Public video right after this. I'm putting the list together as we speak, so he saved me some time asking you that one. I wanted to get your thoughts, and then I was going to say the same thing. This has to be one of the slowest, weirdest weekends of the year for baseball. I mean, Art, is anybody going to be betting baseball this week? And you would think football is going to be front and center, obviously.
It is, and it's really those people who are chasing the screen a little bit, finding, okay, they haven't moved yet, and now we can get maybe 20 cents of value. Maybe we could take an over that's moved a run or an under, whatever the case may be. But listen, baseball will be back Tuesday and Wednesday with playoff baseball, and we'll see a lot of good handle on that. So obviously these next couple of days, not a lot of baseball, but baseball will be front and center early in the week.
And Arthur, tell people once again why they should come down and shout for you as loud as possible so you come out quicker when they want to see you at the Superbook at the Westgate in Las Vegas.
Well, you can always do that unless your name is Prez, because, Prez is banned. There's a big picture of him on the wall in the back of the sports book. They know this guy now. He's just a complete lunatic. But if anyone ever wants to come down, they want to come say hi, they need any information, whatever it may be, Listen, I've had a million people just want to come and say, hey, I see you on WagerTalk. I want to say hi, or they want to know how to sign up for the app, or whatever the case may be. Come down, ask for me, and I'll pop out and say hi and give you a couple minutes and, help you with whatever you need.
Once again, that's Arthur DiCesare. Ask for him by name at the counter at the Superbook in the Westgate in Las Vegas. Art, always enjoy it with you on Friday. And follow him at ArtDice21, ArtDice21, a great follow on Twitter, X as well. Teddy, enjoy doing the show with you once again this week here on Friday. The Prez will be back on Monday, don't you worry. In the meantime, have a great weekend. By the way, there is some baseball talk at 2 o'clock Eastern. First pitch will be live here on Wager Talk. And then college football will be up later this afternoon into the evening as well. And once again, hit subscribe, hit the bell for instant alerts when all the shows go live. And as I mentioned, my college football top 25 video is posted right now. And the NFL Fade the Public video will be up likely tonight into Saturday as well. So hit the bell for instant alerts. And don't forget to thumbs up, like, and comment below for the betting strategies segment, the BS segment. Betting strategies, Teddy, correct? Take us home.
Absolutely. That's going to wrap it for the week here at Wager Talk Today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to spend on the best sports gaming channel that there's out there. Look, honestly, we have every NFL game videoed up. We have every top 25 college football game videoed up. We have dozens of other programming notes, shows, top 25 videos. Check out Wager Talk TV and see all of our programming you can watch from now until you're done, ready to go to bed tonight. That's how much program we have just for this week. We do it every week on Wager Talk TV. Best of luck. Enjoy the games. Have a great weekend. We'll see you guys on Monday.